repository that you folks have been working on, if you see this little button that says commit, that's going to be your history of everything that's happened in this repository. And you're going to see that it's always going to record a person who did it. The message, you're required to give a message, like you all learned yesterday. You have to give a message to make that commit. And the commit is kind of like a snapshot of the whole repository at that point in time. And then there's whatever has been changed with every commit. So if we look at it, we can see exactly, oh, that was not a good one to look at. We can see exactly what changed by that person at that time in the repository. And so that makes it possible to undo something that goes wrong. It also is some transparency and some, what do you call it? They have responsibility for something that they did, which is kind of cool. And you can track, over time what folks have been working on and where exactly they've been contributing. So that's a kind of neat part of working in a GitHub repository or in a Git repository. So yeah, good question. Thanks. And we can talk more about how you would stage this in the classroom because we've done that quite a bit. That might be a further topic. The one thing I wanted to get to real quick is one way to collaborate on GitHub if you don't have access to a repository is a process called fork and pull request. And so this is something I just want to introduce really quick because it's something that you might see from us if we're trying to help you fix a problem with your repository this week. And so what happens is, here's a repository, this DHSI demo, and I can actually create a fork of it, and that makes my own copy of it, and I can edit it myself separate from the main one. And then I make a pull request, which is I'm asking you to take this code that I've edited back into your repository. And so it's a way that somebody external can contribute back to your repository. And so just to demonstrate what that looks like, I created a pull request on this repository. And so you can see there's this tab here. Maybe I need to make this bigger for you folks, sorry. There's a tab here that says pull requests. And so if you see one of those showed up, hopefully it's from us, and it looks kind of like an issue. And you're going to see that there's a person that's asking you to do this pull request. There's a description of it, and people, if they're collaborating nicely, should give you a full description of what this pull request is all about. And you're going to see that there's these little tabs so you can see exactly what's happened. So here's the commits that I made in this pull request, and here's all of the files that get changed by this pull request. And so a lot of times if I see something that's broken in your repository that I can fix for you quickly, I might make this pull request, and you'll get a PR, and it'll be, hey, I saw that your config is broken, here's how you fix it. And then you can look at this and you can see what I did to try to fix it. And then if it looks good, you can go back over to this this pull request conversation here. And you're going to see there's a big green button that says merge the pull request. And what that merge is going to do is actually take that code from me and put it into your actual repository. That's not giving me permission to edit your repository in the future. It's just this one time, this code that I've made in a pull request is going to get merged into the main repository. This is another way that you could collaborate with students as well, if you want to go back to a central, or collaborate with anyone if you want to go back to a central repository without giving everybody full edit access to the main repository. So to merge this pull request, you can see it's from a person, me. There's some changes that were made. There's a description of it. And if it looks good, you can write a comment and be like, thanks for the demo. And you can, on GitHub, you can always use the @ sign and the GitHub name of the person to alert that person that you're talking to them. And then I can say, thanks for the demo, and I can comment that. And then if I want to merge this into the repository, I click the big green button, and it's going to say it's a merge as a commit. So you're making a commit message again, and I press the green button again. And you can see that that was successfully merged into our main branch. And so now you can see our pull requests are no longer there. It's all empty. You can see in our commit history that these commits that I made in a different repository in the copy of the repository are now part of our main repository. And so whatever fixes that I asked you to take in are now part of our repository. So that's called a pull request, a PR. So that's a GitHub feature that I just want to make sure that you're aware of in case you in case we make one for you. All right. So the quick thing that I want to do before Devin gets into taking that code that we've been working on GitHub and getting it down onto your local machine so you can work on it on your computer is really try to clarify exactly all these little parts of our workflow that we've already been working on to try to make sure that all the concepts there are separated out. So I'm going to go ahead and you see these slides now on the screen here? Okay.
Yeah, they're good.
So I'm going to just quickly go over this part again. This is all review from what we talked about yesterday, but the basic idea is you have your metadata as a CSV, you have your objects, objects folder, and then you have this template code that we're providing CollectionBuilder GH in this case, and we're going to and that makes up your project source code, and your source code is going to be transformed into a site using the static site generator called Jekyll. And so we're taking the source code, giving it to Jekyll, and then Jekyll is going to output your static website for us. And in our case, we're having it hosted on GitHub Pages. So this step of Jekyll doing the build is being done by GitHub for us. And then this site that is outputted is being put onto a static server for us by GitHub. And so, as I mentioned, we don't have a GUI interface because we're just going to be working with that source code. There is no application that you can interact with. There's no database to store this information. So it's a little bit different than Omeka or Content DM or something like that, where you actually are interacting with this repository system to do things. So instead, all of our work, as you've seen, looks like spreadsheets, and eventually today what we're going to see is working in a text editor, and so that's your interface. There's no admin interface. So why would you actually even want to do that? And I think we've kind of talked about this a bit, but there is a lot of benefits to static web that make this appealing for DH, and static websites are really fast. The totally minimal infrastructure requirements is what we've been talking about, and how that makes it a little bit more sustainable. And the other thing that I think we haven't really talked too much about is just that it really is a simplified developer experience. So I think that everybody in this room will easily be able to make a collection. Everybody in this room, if you spent maybe maybe a month actually really learning everything about CollectionBuilder, you could actually rewrite it yourself. And keep in mind that this entire project is written by Olivia, myself, and Devin. So a bunch of librarians wrote this. There were not a bunch of developers. We didn't have a dozen years of funding with a bunch of developers to create this. And so even though it seems really complicated and there's a lot of barriers to getting started, ultimately that bar is not insanely high. You don't have to rewrite Omeka to create this. And then all this content, because it's this plain text formats, is really preservation and migration ready. So even if you've spent time prepping your metadata and your objects, it's all ready to go into a different platform if you really if CollectionBuilder isn't really working, and it's ready to be preserved for the future, which is really great for projects. So that's just a quick review of that. And so what I want to make clear right now is that we have all these things that we've been working with on GitHub, and I want to make sure that they're clear what the different parts of that are, because they get really squishily put together as you kind of just start working on it. So the first thing, we've been working on GitHub, and GitHub is a code hosting repository or service. It's a web platform, and it's really built around a piece of software that's called Git. And so Git is a version control software. And that's why you've been making commits to kind of save your work on the web interface right now. And so Git is a piece of software. It can be installed on your computer, and hopefully you've done that already, or you can use it on a cloud service like GitHub. And so GitHub's purpose is really to provide a central place where we can put that code and collaborate on it. And it provides a lot of those collaboration and project management features that make it really convenient to work and collaborate on code. Otherwise, it would be a lot more difficult to do that work. And so you want to just make sure that Git is a separate thing. It's a software. GitHub is a platform, a web platform, and a service. And then the other thing that we're using in this is Github Pages. And so Github Pages is a free static hosting service that is built into GitHub as a free service. And so from our repository, from any repository on GitHub, we can actually host a simple static site. And so that's what we did yesterday when you created your collections. You're using Git on GitHub, and you're creating a repository, which is a folder of files. And then GitHub Pages is taking that folder of source code, using Jekyll to build it out, and then hosting it on their static web server. And so you all have now a static site available. That's your collection, your demo collection. So those are the first part of our kind of like ingredients that we're using in this workflow. The second part that we're going to get to today is what if you want to do all of this on your local machine? You kind of need a development environment to be able to build out your site using Jekyll. And so there's a few parts that go into that development environment in addition to Git. So on your local machine, you're going to use Git to get that code down to your local machine and continue doing that version control on your local machine. And then you're going to need a couple things to be able to build the site locally. So the first is Ruby, and that's a programming language, and it's a programming language is a piece of software on your computer. And you don't need to know anything at all about Ruby, but you do need it to be able to run Jekyll. The second thing that we have is Bundler, and this is a part of Ruby really, and it's a dependency management system. And it's annoying, but it helps avoid having a lot of issues with Ruby. And so this is going to be one of the more frustrating parts if you ever run into issues trying to get Ruby working and figuring out what's going on with Bundler and Ruby. So Bundler is just a tool to try to help make sure that everything that you need to run Jekyll is actually there and it is version controlled. And then the final part of this little stack of your environment is going to be Jekyll, and that's the actual static website generator that we actually want to use. And so this is a little piece of software that's written in Ruby. And so that's why we need Ruby to install it. And so that's the static site generator is going to take that source code that we have again, and it's going to run these development tools that it has built into it to output that final static site, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that actually is your digital collection that is published on the web. And so those are the three parts that we're going to have on our local machine. And then the final thing that we need that's separate from all those other parts of our workflow is CollectionBuilder. And so I want to just make sure that you understand that the CollectionBuilder itself is a folder of files. It's a template. It's a framework for creating digital collections, and you're adding in your metadata, you're adding in your objects, and you're adding in some configurations. And so that folder of files, that source code for CollectionBuilder, is what CollectionBuilder is. CollectionBuilder isn't a piece of software like Jekyll. It's not part of Git. It's not part of GitHub. It doesn't depend on any of those things. It's a template in and of itself. So just trying to keep these overlapping, intertwined parts of our workflow separate so that you understand kind of how they're divided. And the important thing about that is because what we're teaching you here is actually a totally a development workflow that's actually independent from CollectionBuilder. This isn't about necessarily just learning about CollectionBuilder. The stuff that you're doing right now is actually setting you up to develop all kinds of static sites and other types of static templates that are out there in the DH world, like WAX and ED and some other options, oral history as data, are going to follow this exact same workflow and these exact same tools. And so it's just really important to be able to understand the differences between these parts of our workflow and how they can empower you to do other types of projects. So any quick questions there about kind of how these different parts stack up to create our website? It's still probably a little bit hazy, but I just wanted to try to make some of that division clear before we start jumping into using Git and GitHub Desktop to pull this code down to our local machine and work on it on our local machine today. there's no questions, we're going to let Devin just jump right into it. Stop sharing.
Okay. So this portion I will walk through kind of cloning your repository, pulling it down to your own local machine, setting up a development server, and making a few changes. You may have, as you try to turn this on or do what I do, things may break. Getting this software to work is sometimes difficult. If you have issues, you can chat with Evan and Olivia, and we can also help you after class to fix those. Sometimes they can get a little hairy. But we've had good luck lately, so hopefully we don't have any of that. So let me share one. And I'm going to pull up the DHSI demo site here. I am signed in, so I should be able to pull this down. I have GitHub Desktop installed and I do not have it open. So I'm going to click on the code option here. So it's always there at the top right. Sometimes and then you can always just, and you can do this with anybody's code. Like yesterday in troubleshooting some issues, I downloaded somebody else's code to my GitHub Desktop and looked at it, turned it on, fixed it, and then I kind of was able to know it. And you might get a little, do you want to open? So just open GitHub Desktop. Stuff over here. And if nothing happens, like it's not, oh, there it goes. Okay, so you can see it right down here. And here it is. And so you'll get a prompt here that says clone a repository. And what's it saying is this is the GitHub repository that you're cloning, and this is the local path where you're storing it. So I have my GitHub repository stored in my documents folder, in a GitHub folder, and this will just be, like Evan reiterated, like a folder of files and folders. That's what CollectionBuilder is. That's what the template is. And so I'm going to clone it. It'll pull it's going to pull itself down from the cloud, from GitHub. And now you're going to start to see it show up on your own page. And so this is the same repository that Olivia worked on yesterday. And so we're going to use that as a piece. And so here we are. You can see up here, we'll just do a little tour. We've got the current repository is DHSI demo 2022. There's a number of different kind of quick buttons here, and we'll go over there in a second. There's a history tab, so you can click on the history tab and see those commits that were made earlier today and yesterday. And if you want to see the diffs, you can start to see what changed, and you can look at different files and things like that. So you can see that the red was subtracted, etc. We have no changes. Once you make a change in a file, it'll show up here, and this is where you would make your commit message, and we'll show that in a second. Fetch origin is really, so especially if you're collaborating on this and your collaborators might be working on it, you're always going to want to start by, if you open it up, fetch the origin, see what's there. And if there is a change, you'll have another option here that shows up called pull origin, and you'll pull it down. And then we're going to look at first where this is. So this is the repository menu, and this gets you to a lot of the places you might want to see. So if you wanted to go right to where it is on GitHub, here's view on GitHub. Here's open in the terminal. You don't want to do that right now, but we just want to see it first. So I'm going to show an Explorer. And let me try to get over so you can see it too. And so you can see this is in my documents folder, in the GitHub folder, in its own project folder, DHSI 2022. And these are all the files you were editing. Here's the data folder where you should put your metadata, and the objects are here, pulled down from what we did yesterday. So that's just to look at it there. You can always just go find it. It's if once you know where they are, you also will have these buttons that are usually shortcuts for ones you want. Here's view on GitHub, here's show an Explorer, and here's the next one, which is the big one, open in Visual Studio Code. So you can click that. Or you can click that here. And when you set up your GitHub desktop, it usually automatically connects to the text editor you have downloaded, but that might not be the case for some of you right now. So if it says like open in a text editor, or you might need to go to your preferences and change that. But hopefully you can all just open it in Visual Studio Code. And here it is. you can see here this is the text editor, VS Code. Again, it's just working with you across a folder of files and folders, directories and files. And you have all this option here. We've got a get started place here. We're going to close this. And if you did want to edit something, you open it just by clicking it there. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start a terminal so we can see.
Hey, Devin, can you zoom in a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, it's really small.
Is it really small?
Yeah.
Sorry. Is that better?
Maybe one more. Yeah, that's good.
Great. Sorry. I always forget that. Olivia always remembers, though, which is why we're such a good team. So here we are, and you can. We're gonna start a terminal. So this is kind of the moment of reckoning. And you can go up to terminal and push new terminal. You can also push Control tilde, which is the top left button, and it'll also open it. But I mean, I often just go to new terminal. The shortcut works as well. And you can see it's kind of a colorful terminal down here. This is the bash terminal, and if you look, there are you can do some other different types of terminals, but you want to be in Git Bash on Windows, and on Mac you should be on Bash or ZSH. If not, it'll still probably work. These are just the recommended terminals that we'd like you to use. And to change the default, you can go and select your default profile here, and it'll give you some other options. Right now, we've got Git Bash, so I'm happy with that, and I would like that to stay. So I'm going to leave that there. So this is the command line. This is the scary command line. You know, we're trying to we want to make sure that people are not scared of it, though. We have all the commands in the documentation. And we have it on these sort of step-by-step instructions, which are linked in the instructions I'm following here are linked in the syllabus if you want to follow along there too. I'm sorry, I should have said that initially. And so the first command we're going to write is bundle install. And Evan mentioned bundler, which helps you manage your dependencies. And this is just a kind of like a sort of house cleaning command here. We're going to make sure that we have all the right gems for Ruby here and get set up. This is just you just need to do this kind of the first time you're doing it, or if you're coming back to it after a long time. For some reason, my bundle install is taking a while. So it's fetching the gem metadata. It's looking at this gem file here to see what it needs. So these projects have a gem file that lists the dependencies that are required. And once it does, it's making sure that I have all those options. And then it creates it creates a gem file lock. You can see that here. That's the more complicated piece. It took me a long time to get my head around the gem file and the gem file lock. But essentially, you start with bundle install, and then we'll do the next one. And these are the two commands you really need to know. And then you can edit your files and see the changes directly. And so the major command that you'll need to remember is bundle exec Jekyll S. And so what that's doing is it's using the bundler to execute Jekyll, and then the S stands for serve. So this is going to set up a local server on your own computer so that you can see this website as it will be built. So I'm going to push return. And we'll see it start to generate. It's kind of giving you where the destination is. So all the site is being built in this little site folder, which will show up here in a second. It's taking a little bit of time. This depends on, depending on how many objects you have and how fast your computer is. The time could be, especially in the beginning, could be anywhere from like 30 seconds to a minute, or sometimes, on my Mac, a lot of times this takes like 2 seconds. It seems like this computer is running a little slow today. But usually this does not take as long as this. But it is generating. If you were going to get an error, you would see that error by now. I would think. Okay. This is an unusually long time. Okay, but there it goes. So it did take 67 seconds. I'm sorry you had to sit here and watch me for a minute as I watched a terminal. Typically that's a little slow. I don't know if my computer's a little slow today or what. But so it's giving you all of the different kind of some of the information about where the config file is, where the source is. You don't really need to know that. What you really want to look at is this link here, the server link. And this will, if I open it here, this is going to open in Firefox on my other screen. But I want to actually, I'm going to open it in, I'm going to copy it and paste it into Chrome so you all can see it. So here we are. And here's our DHSI 2022 demo collection. So this is what we set up yesterday. If you look at the server address, it's at a local server on your own computer. This is not open to the web. This is not, no one else can see this anywhere. This is just locally served. The browser itself is building the site, or I mean the computer itself is building the site and serving it. And now we have, but the great thing is now any change that we make, hopefully it won't take 67 seconds, we'll be able to see automatically. So we're going to make two small changes, and just to get a sense of what is available and what it looks like to make a change. The first one we want to do is I think a lot of you might want to do this, is we want to find an image to be the featured image on the page. And so there's nothing here now, but once we look and find an image we like, we can pick one and go for it. So there's a number of great, and so for the featured image on your main page, you're often looking for more of a landscape picture, a large picture that's sort of wide, and you can adjust where that, what if it centers on the top, the bottom, or the center as well. So this is Frank B. Robinson, and working with at a sorter. Here are some of the Psychiana staff members. You can see they're primarily female, doing the sorting and the mailing, and of course the charismatic kind of con man here. But let's pick Frank B. Robinson in front of his Duesenberg convertible. So I'm going to click in here. And so what you'll need to do is grab the object ID of the item you want to feature as your featured image. So I'm going to copy that from the URL there, Psychiana 024. You can also do this from your spreadsheet if you'd like. And then I'm going to go up and open the folder data and scroll down to the theme YAML file and click it. And so you'll see it's open there. I'm going to drop this this terminal down a little bit. And this is just like that config YAML we looked at yesterday. A lot of commented features that describe what you're going to edit, and this will control a lot of the look and feel of your collection. And Olivia is going to go through this more fully. So I just want to get one picture up there and see what that does. So I copied that object ID, and now I'm changing the object ID to Psychiana 024. I'm going to push Control S to save it, and you can see now that it's regenerating. And just to show you, like if I wanted to make this home title padding, will make it bigger or smaller. If I wanted to make it that, when it has a circle up there, it's not been saved. So that won't change yet, but you can see that there. And so now, sorry, that's the wrong control. So now if we go back to our DHSI demo collection, we can see that there is Frank B. Robinson with his eyes cut off. And that we have a featured image. So that's something all of you should probably be able to do. I'm going to change it so that it's 12M, which will make it a little bigger. And if you wanted to change the home banner image position, you could also set it's defaulted as center, but you could also make it top or bottom there by changing that feature. So I've changed that. It got rebuilt, and now it's just enough bigger. So I think this is kind of perfect for what I'd like desire at this time. And so I'd like to make one more change and just show you almost all of the files that you would change in this collection builder template would change the server base immediately. However, if you did change the config.yaml file, and we'll do that here, this only gets picked up on the first build. So you would need to stop the server and rebuild. So let's say, I'm going to actually say this is, I'm going to change the tagline. So, and it was a huge religion. It was like the 8th largest religion at the time. I'm going to push save, and you'll see that circle go away. you can see down here, nothing is getting regenerated because this is not a file that actually regenerates. So if I go back here, what should change is this little tagline, but if I refresh, nothing there. So I'm gonna close that. And now to stop your server, you're gonna push Control-C, and it's gonna say terminate batch job, and you'll push yes. Sometimes you have to push that twice. And now I'm back to the terminal. The development site has been shut down. If I try to refresh, I will get this site can't be reached, a 404, essentially. And here we go. So another great thing about the terminal and working in the terminal is if you want to repeat a command you made, you just need to use your arrow keys. So I'm just going to push arrow up, and you'll see that that bundle exec Jekyll S is redone here. I'm going to push return, and we're going to regenerate the site with this terrible tagline that I just added. And you're going to see that that actually works. As this might take a little bit of time, if there are any questions, I'm sorry it's taking so long on my computer today. This is usually not that long.
I think we might, mine's really slow too right now. I think we're like getting locked down by some security thing on our computers, because it's like, I just did a profile and it's in the final write that it takes 30 of the seconds. So very odd.
Of course it happens when we do.
Yeah, I've never encountered this before.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, in terms of command line work, you know, these are basically the only, this bundle exec Jekyll S is, you know, when I go and work on something and open it up, that's what I do. I type that out and use it. And then I'm not really in the command line other than that, other than the start the development server. So let's go back to our site and see what changed. Oh, great. So now we have this bad tagline. We've made a change to the featured image in the theme YAML. We've made our changes. And now for the really cool part, we go back to GitHub Desktop. And you can see the changes that we've made are represented in the GitHub Desktop. And you can see what changed here. And then now I can make a commit message, and I could make one for each item, which is probably what Evan and Olivia would do, or you could make it for just that. So I could say I'm just going to update the config here. So what I did here was I changed the tagline. I'm going to commit that. Wow, it is super slow. And then I'm going to change, and change the featured image and commit to main. And I could have done that in just one big swoop too. You can just select them all and do, like, I usually do a bunch at the same time. But that's just some better practice. Sometimes do that. And so now I've made those commits, I've made those commit messages, and now it's my time to push it to origin, which just means I'm going to push it up to GitHub so that GitHub receives it and can update the site itself. So we're pushing it up. And if at the same time, at some point you could pull down, if you're working on it, like if Olivia and Evan had made an edit while I was working, I could have pulled their edit back in and reworked it and then pushed back up. So now we've done that. I'm going to go back to the GitHub collection itself. And you'll start to see how the yellow dot here, meaning it's being built right now. But you can see the commits that were added here. Change the tagline, change the featured image. And once this goes from yellow to green, the actual website will be updated. So if you wanted to go and check that out, you can. I also have in these instructions, there's like an advanced option. If you wanted to go, and if you're finding this kind of easy to use and you're ready to go, you can do that as well. So let's just click in here. So it still hasn't been built. We're just waiting for the site to be built on GitHub. Might take a second. But overall, that is kind of a simple and easy introduction into pulling down. We pulled down all of the files onto we cloned the repository onto our local machine. We used GitHub Desktop to do that. We then opened up the repository. We opened up the repository in Explorer and saw that it's just a folder of directories and files. We then opened it with Visual Studio Code so we could edit files directly in Visual Studio Code and save them. We then went back to GitHub Desktop, made a commit message and pushed it back up to GitHub itself. And it's been rebuilt. So let's see it. And sometimes you have to actually refresh, do kind of a hard refresh. So Control-Shift-R is a hard refresh on your GitHub, especially a GitHub Pages site. Sometimes it gets cached. And so now you can see that the changes I made are there. So that is that. And I'm going to push it back to Evan to do a quick demonstration of what this looks like if you're just using Visual Studio Code to do GitHub. Are we doing that?
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate some of the stuff you just said again.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sorry. Getting there.
Okay. I know there's some folks that still have some issues out there. Hold on. So yeah, sorry. I'm gonna go back to that in just a second. So just to reiterate once again, kind of what Devin was talking about is, the thing to keep in mind is that your repository that you see on GitHub. So if I'm over here at this demo DHSI repository, you can see that, this right here looks basically like an Explorer, and that's what it is. Your repository is always just a folder of files. And so when you're using Git and GitHub Desktop to clone, make a copy of it down on your local machine, what you're doing is copying literally a folder of files. And so this repository DHSI demo 2022, I have here in a folder of files as a folder on my on my computer locally. And so when you're using GitHub Desktop, that's a helpful tool to interact with Git and GitHub. But ultimately what GitHub Desktop is using is Git underneath. And so that's a piece of software that you also have installed on your computer. And so there's lots of different ways that you could be using Git. And so we already have been using it in the web interface, and now we've been using it on GitHub Desktop. And you also can use it directly in your text editor or via the command line. And so here's this DHSI demo 2022 that Devin's been working on and we've been working on. And so I'm going to open it up with VS Code. I like to click on the folder or right click on the folder, and then I say open with code. That's my preferred way of getting it open. And so I have it here open inside of my editor. And so again, just to look through the features of this editor, just to reiterate again what Devin kind of went through, I'll try to make it big. Whoa, too big. You have on this side an Explorer. So this is just a file explorer, just like you have. So it's just looking, now we're looking inside this folder. And so it has exactly the same contents here. We have folders with everything in it. We have these individual files like this config that you're looking at. So just reiterating exactly what Devin said. We also have some heads up information here. Down in the corner is the branch that you're currently on, which we haven't talked about. And there's a search, so you can search all of the code that's in your project. And then there's this source control panel, this little thing that is the Git icon actually. And so this little panel is exactly the same as GitHub Desktop. If you make a change, you can use that panel to pull and push and make commits as well. And so I'm going to actually just do a pull to make sure that I'm up to date with the code that Devin's done. And you're going to see that it looks like I am. And so if I make a new change, oh, Psychiana was a huge religion. Okay.
I
let's go back.
For that. That's really
bad. Let's go back to what I had it, because I thought that was great. I can't remember what it was, but let's put it back to hands-on with CollectionBuilder. And so if I go back over to that config.yaml, and I'm going to make a change here by replacing that and doing a Control S, saves that file for me. And you're going to see that the editor actually highlights it here because it knows that something's actually changed from Git. And you're also going to see that there's a little 1 that shows up over here. And so this is a way that you can just do this thing that you just did in GitHub Desktop without leaving the editor. So it's exactly the same thing. It's a list of files that have been changed. So we've only had 1 changed right now. This little plus button adds that to your commit. And then right here is a box to give a message. And so I'm going to say, update the tagline again. And then this little checkbox up here at the top will make that commit. Now, important thing to keep in mind with both doing this and using GitHub Desktop is once you've made this commit on your local machine, it is done only on your local machine. It's not on GitHub yet. And so the final step is to make a commit on your local machine and then push that up to GitHub. And so to push that, there's this little button that automatically shows up to say sync changes, and the same thing happened in GitHub Desktop. So you can sync the changes, and we'll just say okay. And we're going to do that push. We're taking that commit that we just made on our local machine, that's only on my local machine, and we're going to put that up onto GitHub. And so now I can pop back over to GitHub in this repository, and I can click on the history here, and you're going to see that the stuff that pull request I did earlier is there in the history. The stuff that Devin just did on his local machine is here now. And then that little commit that I just showed you right now on my machine is now up on the repository history as well. And so you can use Git through a variety of different methods like that. The other thing that you can do is use it on the command line. And so I just made another little change here. And so if I was doing it on the command line, I would be using Git as a command line option. And so there's a lot of people will do kind of a combination of using this built-in tool here, using GitHub Desktop for some of the things, and maybe using the command line when you wanted to do that. So just to keep in mind that Git itself, this version control piece of software that we're using, is not dependent on all these other systems that we're also using to make it a little bit easier to make this workflow go smoothly. So I think that was basically what I was trying to cover.
And it's not like one is better than the other. I think, you know, it's sort of what works for you. GitHub Desktop works for me. That's sort of like visually become ingrained in my mind, and I kind of like moving between the different pieces to kind of separate the actions. But I know both Evan and Olivia really find it kind of frustrating to go back and forth. So they like to be in the same space and move things up and down, you know, pull and push with Git that way.
And so, yeah, no, the one other thing that we kind of that we were talking that we haven't talked about, I guess, is you know, this isn't a Git workshop. There's a lot to Git, and I have a Git workshop that you could watch if you want. You know, Devin said that, you know, you can make more than one change at a time, you know, and that's totally correct. And so you can change a whole bunch of files. And then when your commits are kind of topical, and they're supposed to be sort of communication for the future, try to make sense of what has changed in the repository. So a lot of times you also don't have to commit everything at once. So you can make a whole bunch of changes, and you can add only a handful of the files that you've made a change of, and then commit just that set of changes. You don't have to commit a whole batch at the same time. And so that really can be helpful to keep an organization to your history so that your collaborators understand what has changed and what kind of things you're actually working on. And you want to make those commit messages kind of meaningful so that your collaborators understand what's happened and yourself in the future. So yeah, and you can see, you know, there's a lot that you could learn about Git, but if you know the very basics, which is just commit and push and pull, that's all you really need to know to collaborate. And anything more complicated than that is probably going to lead you down a rabbit hole. And we basically don't do anything more complicated than that in our collaborations. And so don't let that intimidate you that Git is complicated. So yeah, I guess that would be my only takeaway.
Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Okay. So I'm going to show how to start updating the way that your site looks and customizing it. I'm going to share my screen, and just like yesterday, put your questions in the chat as I go. So I'll start by I have GitHub desktop pulled up here in case you're following along with this. And I'm just going to click this fetch origin button. And that realized it looked up at GitHub and realized that there are some changes that have been made. So now I can click pull origin. And so now my code should be up to date in Visual Studio Code. So I can go ahead and make this bigger. And start my local server by doing bundle exec Jekyll S again. So while that is generating, I'm going to go up here to the underscore data folder. So this is where we'll be working today as we start customizing our site. You can click into that folder, go down to the bottom of it where I find the theme.yaml file. And that brings it up here. So this is YAML just as we saw yesterday with the config YAML. It works exactly the same. Everything in green is a comment. And the way that this file is structured is set up to have values that you can fill in for different sections of your site. So it starts off with the home page, moves on to the item page, subjects page, locations, map, and so on. So this is sort of the general customization you can do for those pages, and then we'll get into some more specific customization later after we finish the theme file. And I'm not going to hit every single value in this file. I'm going to move a little bit quickly because I think once you see me working on some of those values, it kind of becomes obvious how you can edit the other ones yourself. But if I'm moving too fast or if you have questions, let me know. So it looks like my site did generate, so I can go ahead and copy this URL here. Just do a, oops, did not want to do that. Okay, let's try that again. So while that's going, I do have it pulled up. I can bring it up here. And then once it finishes, we can start making changes. So Devin already added a featured image. I did want to mention that the way that Devin did it was he found an object ID from an object in his collection, an image in the collection specifically, so a JPEG or usually a JPEG file. If you have, say, like a collection full of PDFs or YouTube videos, and none of those none of those can be used for your featured image, you might want to add your own custom featured image, and you can do that in two ways. The first is by following this little comment here. You can actually just grab an image from somewhere else that's not in your collection and then go drop it anywhere in your repository and then put that relative URL to where you added it. So we have this recommendation here to put it in your assets image folder, but you can really put it anywhere that makes sense to you, and then just put that relative URL. So if I were doing that, I'd just copy this and put that there. But I don't want to do that right now. Then the last option is if you have a image that's hosted elsewhere that you want to use as your featured image, you just put that full URL to that image and into this value instead of the object ID. But since we have so many good images in this collection, we're going to stick with this object ID because that one is great. And Devin already changed the padding. You can also change the position. So if you're ever like unsure of what the value for a specific one of these variables should be, you can look above it to the comment there that says that's starts with the pound sign, and then at the end of it gives you the options for this one, which are center, top, or bottom. So if I could change that if I want to. The default is center, but just to see what that looks like, I can add top and then refresh over here, and it moved it down, which doesn't quite look as good. So I'll go back here and stick to center. So moving on here to the item page, you can choose whether or not to have back and forward buttons on your item page. So if I go over here and click on an item, make this a little bigger. These are the browse buttons. So this left button, the right button, and then if you scroll to the bottom of the page, there's also previous and next buttons. If you do not want your users to click through, like I am now, you can go into the theme, look under item page, and next to browse buttons, type false instead of true. Usually we leave these on for almost all of our collections. You can see now they've disappeared. There's no back and next here. There's just a back to browse button. Sometimes if you're working on an especially large collection, having the browse buttons on can actually slow down your build time. But so you might want to take it off as you're developing, but then probably add it back in because it is a nice feature for users to be able to page through those items. Moving on to the subjects page. So this is going to edit our subjects word cloud here. So this is our kind of a cool visualization that lets us see the commonalities across our collection items. And the point of it really is to be able to click on one of these buttons and have it take you back to the browse page so you can see everything that has the subject tag Psychiana headquarters. So we want to remember that because any metadata field that we add to this word cloud, we also want to appear somehow on our on these browse cards on the browse page as well. So you might want to take a look at your metadata as you're editing the first adding or taking away fields from the subjects fields value here. So by default, we include subject and creator. So you can include multiple fields in this value, but if you are sticking with those, you first of all want to make sure that you have both a subject field and a creator field. Sometimes you might not have a creator, or sometimes you might not have subject. So you could take one of those away if you wanted to. Maybe I'll take creator away, and then I'm going to go back here and look for another field that I think might appear often, might have similar values that appear across items. So I know that item information is one of those fields. It's kind of like the physical format of my my objects. So I can add that in along with subject and save. And then once it regenerates here, I can come to my subjects page and refresh. And now I have these new buttons that have appeared that say advertisements. There's one that says buttons. So both of these I know are from my item information page. My item information field, they weren't here before when I just had subject and creator. So if I click on one of these though, it's supposed to take me back to browse, and I'm supposed to be able to see everything with buttons on it, but I can't see that yet because I haven't edited my browse cards. So we'll come back to that after we finish the theme. I just wanted to point that out because it's something really easy to overlook. Your subject's min value is going to be something you change if you have maybe too many words appearing on your word cloud. So this can help you cut it down because it's basically telling Jekyll that the subjects the subject term needs to appear one or more times, or if you changed it to 2 or more times or 3 or more times in order to actually appear on the word cloud. Since we have such a small collection, I'm just going to leave it as 1, but if you have an overwhelmingly large, you might consider cutting down your your subjects by making them have to appear at least 3 times or 2 times across your items. And then for subject stop words, this is important if you have maybe a word that is connected to every single one of your items in your collection. So sometimes you have a collection all about like with photographs of trains, and so they all have trains as their subject, and that's not especially helpful if we want this subject cloud to be really helping people to sort through and organize or filter the collection the way that it does now. So like say the single page, maybe let's say that applies to to every item in my collection, just theoretically. So I could come here and type in single page. You want to type it in exactly as it appears in your metadata. And then once that has updated, I can refresh. And now that single page button is gone. So you have that option. If you have multiple stop words, you just use a semicolon and add another field value after your first value. Locations page works exactly the same. It's also a word cloud. So I'm not going to edit that one, but if you are using locations, you can edit it in the same way you did for subjects. I'm going to move down to the map page. So there are a lot of things to edit for a map if you want to, but probably the most important two are the latitude, longitude, as well as a zoom level. So we noticed on the map yesterday that we're pretty zoomed into this Pacific Northwest section of the country, but if we zoom out, we can see that there are some things over in the east and the south. So what we really need is to center the map in the center of the country and to zoom out a little bit. So I'm going to go over to my Google Maps, zoom out here until I can get the states here, and then put my mouse in the middle of Kansas and right click, and then select, just click on this latitude and longitude that appear here. That copies it to my clipboard. I can come back to my theme, and I'm going to just paste right over that first latitude value, copy the longitude value, and delete that extra comma, and then paste the longitude into the longitude value. So I'll save that and then refresh. So now I'm in the middle of the states, but need to zoom out. So I'm going to go back over here, look at my zoom level. So if you need to zoom out, you want a lower zoom level. If you need to zoom in, you want a higher zoom level. I'm going to change mine to 4. And refresh again. So this is nice now. So my users won't, forget or not know about the item that's over in Illinois or New York. So this looks good to me. You can also do other things like change the map base. There are 3 to choose from here. I'll just pick one for fun. So this changes the default map base that will show up when your user arrives on the map page. Looks like that. You can change some of these values have to do with your map search. So I'm not going to get too much into that for time's sake. I'll move on, but all of this is documented in our documentation too, and works the same way as what I've been doing this whole time. So I'm going to skip down to the data section here. And this is going to give you control over what data your collection exports. So again, we looked at this yesterday, but over on the home page, there's this collections as data section with all of these different types of data to download. And all of these can be downloaded from the data page from this download data modal, where there's a little bit more of a description about each one. So the first one that I'm concerned with now is the metadata CSV, also the metadata JSON. Those are the same data in different formats. This lets you control what's actually in that metadata data set. So it just gives you right off the bat this sort of stock metadata fields that are comma separated and put between quotation marks. So this is not customized to your metadata fields at all. You might by chance have many of the same value or the same fields, but it won't be exactly the same. So if you want somebody to be able to download your metadata, you want to come to your metadata file and then just simply copy that first row. So copy all of your metadata fields, and you can paste them right in between those quotation marks. So keep the quotation marks there. And they're already comma separated because you copied them from a comma separated values file. So you should be good to go. You can now edit it though, if there's any fields that you don't want people to download by default when they download that file. Maybe there's like you know, something that you just don't think people need to know about. So like, for instance, I could take away source just for the sake of having something to take away. And now if I go and open this JSON file, I can see that for each of my objects, there is a value for all of the fields that I've selected and put into the metadata export fields. And you can do the same for the metadata facets fields. So this is going to be sort of a curated set of fields that you think people might want to visualize or download. And it's up to you to determine what those fields are. So this can be found with from the facets JSON link here. So I'm going to actually copy it. I'll open it in a new tab. This is actually kind of better to look at on Firefox. So if you have the Firefox browser, you can pull it up, and then it will kind of color code things for you and let you reduce or maximize the terms. But basically what this is doing is, so in our over in our theme field, we've selected 3 fields: subject, creator, and format. And when we're looking at them in the JSON, it's taken each of those metadata fields. So here's subject, and then given you all the terms that appear in that field and the number of times they appear in your collection. And then if we scroll down far enough, we see creator and format have had the same things done to them. So often, usually with, like, you know, a much bigger collection that's not just a subset of a collection like we have here, you'll see much bigger numbers across the collection of subject terms that are being repeated. And it can be pretty helpful if you are, you know, customizing your collection and want to decide, just want to look for patterns first off, and then decide what to highlight, either on the about page or the subjects word cloud, or in a timeline maybe. So it's a good thing to do as you're creating your collection, and then to let you know, other people be able to download in the future. So I'm going to add a field. I think it's great that these 3 are included there. I'm also going to add item information, since I thought that was a pretty good field too. One thing to note is that you want each of the fields that you add here to have values that are repeated across items. So it wouldn't make much sense to have like title, which is a unique value, be included in the facets download, because you would just have all of the titles listed and then the number 1 next to all of them. So in the case of item information, though, we can see that advertisements appears twice, flyers 16 times, photographs 29, and so on. So you keep in mind that it's most useful if it's showing you the sort of the patterns across the greater collection. Are there any questions?
Katharina is asking about, is there a way to have the metadata exported from an e-catalog of an archive? So I think kind of part of that question is not necessarily about the data exports for CollectionBuilder, but what the metadata that you start with, maybe? Is that right, Katrina? Or
yeah, like I just figured that, let's say I'm using archival material from a repository and you message that it's all within the metadata, and I would have to update and debug that CSV file. So is there a way that I can say, check that information for this item to see if it's up to date?
Yeah, there's
like,
not. So there's not an automatic way to do that, but what I would do is get the CollectionBuilder collection to be configured up to match your what you can export from that system. And so that's what we do with ContentDM, is that you can export metadata from ContentDM as a TSV, a tab separated values. And then we have a way to just quickly turn that into a CSV. And then we basically just use the fields that exist in ContentDM for that collection, so that we don't have to do a bunch of data wrangling to get it ready to build that collection. CollectionBuilder itself is not, you know, there's no database, there's no server-side language, so it's not able to do something more complicated like query the external database and check that metadata against it and update its internal metadata. So that would be done by you by exporting that metadata and putting that CSV into the template again. So the way to make that work easier is if you can make sure that whatever you can export is just immediately compatible with how you've configured your CollectionBuilder project. Does that kind of answer what your question would be?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you. I hope
All right,
that
great.
wasn't out of timing.
Great, thanks.
So yeah,
Okay.
definitely the metadata doesn't need to always be created from scratch. Most of the time when we're creating collections, the metadata comes from somewhere else. Comes from special collections, comes from a finding aid, comes from content DM collection that somebody already created. So yeah, you definitely don't need to like create brand new metadata for your project. You should reconfigure the project to match the metadata that you have.
Yeah, we use the content DM export all the time with our collections. So this second part of the theme file are more advanced options that you may or may not want to do, and that's fine if you just want to focus on the pages and the collection sort of items themselves and not worry about advanced options right now. That's okay. Or if you might not like any of these options either. So I'll just demonstrate them pretty quickly. The navbar colors and the boot swatch themes are both based on Bootstrap, which is a popular package of CSS and JavaScript that provides styling and like the layout structure of websites, and it's what CollectionBuilder uses, and we'll talk about it I think a little bit later this week, but you can kind of quickly change your it's what we style the site with. So if we want to change our navbar color and our navbar background, we can kind of toggle between navbar dark and switch it to navbar light, and then change the background from dark to light as well. So if I go over here, you can see that the navbar is dark right now, but when I refresh, since I made that change, it's going to turn this lighter color, and that's the same across all of my pages on my site. I like the darker color, so I'm going to reverse that change. You can change it to these other colors as well for the background, primary, secondary. These are all the Bootstrap colors, so you can go to the Bootstrap website and look at what their standard colors are if you want to. The boot swatch themes section here is something that you can have fun playing around with. We don't typically recommend actually using these for your final site. Basically, they are themes that automatically change the style of your text, the size of your text, the sort of the color themes of your site. So you can have fun like playing around with it all. And here are the options to choose from. They're all in this comment here, separated by semicolons. So I'll try out a few so you can see. Flatly, I think actually is one that looks kind of okay. So that just changed. You can see my banner, the navbar looks different. The text is different. All of my color themes are now this sort of grayish green and dark blue color. I can go to browse and see it just changed automatically across my site. I can choose like Cosmo maybe.
We just think this is a fun way to kind of demonstrate how powerful CSS is in like changing the look and feel of your site. So it's always just kind of fun to play around with and looks kind of interesting. So
Do Lux, Olivia.
Lux, okay. So this is Lux. See, if that really changes the look of things.
And I've just started learning HTML and CSS. So is it possible to activate change some stylistic items, or we always have to change them?
sorry, we kind of we lost your mic there. Maybe you want to put it in chat. But I think you're asking, can you add your own CSS? Is that maybe what you're asking?
I can
couldn't
show.
So yeah, you
way
can
to do
totally
it.
customize the CSS by just adding a couple extra classes. And oh yeah, Olivia's trying. Sorry, I'll just
Oh,
let you do that.
Okay. So over in this SAS folder here, if you just want to make like a quick change to the way that something looks, or you're adding new elements to your about page, for instance, you can add that new custom CSS here in the custom.scss file. We have this, we're using SAS, so we're able to pull in this kind of separate, organize our CSS into these separate files and then pull them all in as the site is being built. So the pages, if you're like wondering how, something is styled on a specific page, you can come to the pages SCSS, for instance, and look at the classes and that are there. But if we made this custom file blank, so you can just quickly, add in your own class. And is there anything you would add to that, Evan?
Well, yeah, so the cool part about CSS is that it is cascading. And so what you want to do is we have Bootstrap, and that's the first set of styles that come on. Then CollectionBuilder puts on some additional styles. And then this custom CSS is the last one. So anything that you put in there overrides everything else. And so that's how you really want to do your customization, is to be able to continue to override the things that are there. So that way you don't have to redo the entire theme. You don't have to go and edit Bootstrap. You just override the little bits of pieces that you want to override in the custom SCSS. And so SCSS is a language called SAS for it's a way of writing CSS that's a little bit easier and has some advanced functionality in it. And so it's a really nice, you can just write regular CSS in here, but you can also use the additional parts that SAS adds into the language to make it easier to write your CSS. So it's actually a pretty nice way to write CSS once you look into it. But again, you can just use regular CSS in there, and then whatever you put in that custom is going to override all the rest of the styling on the site. So it's a really good way to be able to just add your little customizations in there. The one other thing that that is a real handy way is that config themes colors. I'm not sure if we're going to talk about this later, but this is a little configuration file that lets you override all of the Bootstrap colors or add your own custom colors that you want to add into the Bootstrap there. So basically, if you look on our site, it's going to use text, or it's using the primary color, I believe, and secondary color, and maybe info a bit. So if you just put in your own color there, that's going to override all of the instances of that color throughout the site. And so it's a really quick and easy way to add some customization to the theme. So yeah, if you maybe put in the primary, just you put red or whatever, and then we'll see that show up. You can just write red.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll see that maybe on the. There we go.
There you go. Yeah. Cool. So that's a nice way to just. That's a lot less drastic than trying to use those boot swatch. The boot swatch we just think are fun because it does such drastic changes, and so you can kind of see the power of CSS. But in general, they're a little bit drastic that we haven't tried to figure out how the theme looks with all of these to see if it actually works or not. But some of them work pretty well, some of them not so much.
Yep. Okay. So I've gotten rid of the boot swatch theme. And I'm coming back to the theme fonts. This just lets you change sort of some basic things like your font size, your base font size, and then the text color, your link color. You can, if you're familiar with Google Fonts, go find a Google font and add that in. We have you can search and find one there. We have this in our comments here, the Roboto font. So if you do add one, you just need that font name, and then you want to link to the style sheet in the font CDN variable there. So if I save that, then I can see the text just changed to my new Google font. So that's kind of fun to play around with too. Then we have the theme. You can actually change the icons that are appearing mostly on the browse page. So for PDFs especially, are always going to have this little file icon. MP3s will have the play icon there. And what we're using is the Bootstrap icon. So if you are interested in changing your icons, you could go, look around Bootstrap icon site, find the name of one that you want to replace like PDFs with, and probably won't do this, but it is an option. So if you were into that, you would want to take away the comments in front of these icon sections, and then replace the name of the icon with the one that you want to add for each of these image or these item types. So now that I have finished my theme, let's say that I think I'm happy with it. I'm going to, I'll just do a commit so that you all can see, kind of get a refresher for how to do that. I'll do it from the GitHub desktop, just say update theme. And we're just committing this one file. I can click commit to main. And then remember, that doesn't actually get pushed up to GitHub yet until I click on push origin. So that is pushed up now. You should be able to see the changes that I made to the theme appear in the live site in a few minutes. So with the remaining time, I'm going to show how to kind of make some more specific customizations to some of the pages. So you'll notice also in this data folder, besides the theme, which we've been working on, there are these config CSVs. So they all start with the word config, and after that, they have the name of a specific page or element that you're going to work on. I'm going to start with the config browse, which will let us edit the information that's appearing on these browse cards. So we call the little the combination of the image and the text and buttons underneath it a browse card. Every image, every item in your collection automatically gets a browse card on the browse page. And if you remember, it was really important that we add all of the subjects, all of the metadata fields to the browse cards that we think somebody might search for or need to be able to search on this page. So if we're looking closer at this config browse, this is just a CSV, so just the same as your metadata. The first row here is your field names, and then below that is the data that you're adding for each metadata field. And going through the field names here, we have the metadata field is just field. So if you come over and look at your metadata, maybe you want to add the item information field to the browse card. So I can go ahead and add that in the next available row. And if you want to give it a display name so that it will show up, so like date has a display name here, that means that we can see the word date. You could customize that here and say like physical format. And then if you want to make it a button, you can make that that column true. So now if I save and then come back and refresh, I see my new field added here. And then my buttons, the values of that field added as buttons, which means I can click them and be able to search for them now. This also means that I can go over to subjects. If I click on buttons, then I'm actually able to search for any item that has a physical format of button. So, but I don't really like the way that this looks. I don't really like the display name or the button for my item information. So if I come back here, I can actually get rid of the display name, I could just leave it as button if I wanted to, but I could also delete true for button and look at this next one that says hidden and make it and give it the value of true for hidden. So this means that that information is going to be searchable on the browse page now, the item information is, but I won't actually see it appear as a button on the card anymore. So to show you, I can go over here, I can click on the buttons again, and it brings up those two items that have that the item information value. These are all documented in our documentation, which is linked in your homework tonight too. So if you're not quite sure what something is, be sure to look there. The sort name allows you to add a field to this sort dropdown. So I could add item information to the dropdown if I wanted to, and be able to let my users sort by the physical format of my items if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. I think hidden is just fine, but you'll want to kind of like take a close look at your metadata and decide what should really go on those browse page according to what you think people might search for and how it should appear on the browse cards as well. All of these config CSVs work the same way. So they all have similar field names, field display name. This lets you control whether it's searchable on the map. I'm going to skip ahead to, I think I'll go to config nav next. So this is going to let me control what is showing up in the navigation bar. you might have a collection that doesn't have, maybe you can't find the location of all of your items, so it's not worth having a map or locations page. In this case, maybe for this collection, I'm happy with the map, but don't think the locations page is necessary. So I can go ahead and just delete this row from this CSV. So what we have here is the display name that's appearing in the navigation bar. So home, browse, subjects, and so on. Next to that is the stub, which is the URL for that specific page. And then you can make it into a drop-down and have several pages listed under one, but under one link in the navigation if you want to, which we often do for about, but aren't going to do right now. So if I want to get rid of one of those pages, like locations, I can just delete it and it will disappear from the navigation bar. You can always add it back. So there it's gone now. They just go from subjects to map. You can always add it back in if you want to add it. It's not gone forever, but it's an easy and quick way to just be able to customize your navigation bar to so it's only showing what you want users to see. And then I think I'll just do config metadata and then we can wrap up. So the config metadata CSV will let you edit what is appearing on your item page. So by default, it will you'll likely have a lot of the same metadata fields that the config metadata has by default. So you probably have something showing up here if you followed our metadata instructions, but maybe you have some unique fields that are really important that you want people to see connected to this item that you need to add to the metadata page. Maybe you want to link so you see how these subjects are linked. Maybe you want to link other terms and other fields. You have the capacity to do that too. So for that, you want to come to the config metadata CSV, take a look at what the field names are. Again, we have field, display, name, browse link, and if you want to have it linked to an external place, you can do that as well. So you'll just want to match up and make sure that you actually have a title, you actually have a field named creator. If you don't, if it's like author or something, change that from author to or change that from creator to whatever your version of creator is. Subject, location. I know that I have all of these fields, but I also know that I want to add my my item information field. And I'll just continue calling it physical format. So let's take a look at what that looks like, just saving it like that. and refresh. And so now it's appearing right under description, and it's here. It's on all of my it's on all of the items that actually have a value for item information. I can also now make it a browse link. So the way that subjects is working, it lets me get back to the browse page again. Item information is very similar. As we've seen, there's terms that appear across multiple items. So I can go to browse link and type in true, and then refresh. And now these have become browse links as well. So that's pretty useful, again, for directing people back to that browse to be able to filter and sort according to what they're interested in. If I want to delete something from this page, I can do it just the same way I did with config nav. So say again, maybe I don't want the source, or maybe I don't want the identifier in this case. So I'm going to delete the identifier. And then so this field should disappear when I refresh, and now it's gone. So you have the opportunity to edit all of that. And all of these files work the same way. Again, you can edit the map, you can edit the search to edit what shows up when you search your site, what fields are being searched and which ones pop up. You can edit what is available on the data table. And then we already looked at the config colors, which lets you edit and customize your colors. Does anyone have questions about those before I commit them? Okay. I'll show you the way that I usually make commits. I'm going to commit all of these at once. So I'm in Visual Studio Code. I've made my changes. And now I've come over to the source control section that Evan showed. I can hover over this little plus button and click on it. And then it moves everything out of changes into staged changes up here. And I can type my commit message here, say update collection pages or something. When I'm ready to actually commit it, I can click this check mark, which commits it. And then to push, you can click sync changes, or you can actually come down to your terminal and type in git push, and that will push it up too. So now it should appear on our live site in a few seconds. That was a lot of information for one day.
So, but I think once you get used to doing this, to kind of this practice, this model, it goes very quickly, and you can set up a site, within 20 minutes to an hour pretty easily, depending on if the metadata is right and the objects are right. Those are usually the place where you get kind of tied up, but the theming is really fun. And I mean, looking at kind of just learn about the collection, you learn the similarity, the commonalities, as Olivia was mentioning, and try to express those as best you can.
And you can do everything that I did today in the GitHub user interface without pulling it down to your computer. We just like to pull it down at this point because it's so much faster to see the changes. If you're just working through the interface, every time you make a commit, you have to wait, 30 seconds to a minute to actually see what that change looks like. So that's why we've done this. But if you are having, if you are just not comfortable working on Visual Studio Code yet, that's another option.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. The iteration is what is really powerful, being able to see those changes as you're making changes to the code, and getting that instant feedback is really powerful about working on your local machine. But again, like Olivia just said, you could do this entire process actually on the web interface. And I'm going to show you one other quick thing there is.
Hey, we've got one question about how large a collection can be used. And we have some that are like over 3,000 items. I don't think, at a certain point, it'll take a very long time to build and things like that, but it can handle a very large collection. the GitHub Pages only will have a limit on how much file space there is for your files. So if you're trying to serve all those from GitHub Pages, like via the objects folder on GitHub, that might be where you run into an issue. But in terms of just building out a site, it can handle a pretty large amount.
Yeah, so the GitHub, this version that we're using today, CollectionBuilder GH, is designed for on GitHub, and there is a limit of about a gig for the whole repository. So you don't want to have a whole bunch of images and objects and PDFs and full-size stuff in a GH project. It's really not designed for that. It's kind of for testing and learning and teaching and having these small, reasonable size objects. We have some other templates that are more fully featured, and you can pull in stuff from other repositories. You can host your objects in another location, and then be able to overcome those limitations and still use GitHub infrastructure for hosting your site if you want. I was just going to show, before we answer this other question, Clarissa, I was just going to jump really quick into one other thing on the GitHub web interface. So one other thing that's actually built into GitHub, if you want, is we've been working with VS Code on your local machine today, but you can actually use it from the web as well. So if you're on your repository, so this is this DH demo repository, which I'm a collaborator on. If you just press the period button while you're just on that repository homepage, it actually opens up a web-based, browser-based version of VS Code. So you can do some editing right there, using the same tool that we were just demoing on your local machine in this browser-based version of it, which can be very handy. And so it has all the same kind of features. Here's that little GitHub tab, and here's all of your file explorer, and you can go ahead and edit. So if we're looking over at the theme here, we can edit the theme, and you can just do it right here in the browser. And then when you want to go back, you can go back to the repository here. So that's a really powerful, nice way to be editing your project right on the GitHub web interface. And again, that lets you avoid having to install anything at all on your local machine. The disadvantage is going to be that the build is slow. You can't just see that instantaneous feedback on the changes that you made. So we really like pulling it down to our local machine and working with Jekyll, but it does present that additional hurdle of having stuff installed. So a lot of times if you're working with collaborators who don't want to install anything, or students, you can still work on this web interface, very efficiently and create a full project without any of those barriers. But to see that instant feedback on the changes that you make is really powerful too. So it's worth getting that environment set up on your machine. Clarissa is asking about doing multi-page items that are images of a manuscript, for example. And so, yeah, this isn't directly built in to the repository right now, or into the template right now, but it's something that we've done for a lot of different use cases. We call those a case where an item, one record in your collection, has multiple objects associated with it. We call those compound objects. And so it wouldn't necessarily be set up very well for a manuscript without a lot of customization. Olivia's actually done that in one of her projects, but you can do some fairly easy customization with a couple of different approaches to add multiple images or multiple objects associated with a single record to create those compound objects. There's definitely a couple different approaches to doing that. So it's definitely possible. For language support, multiple language support, there's two parts to that question, I think. Part of that is, does it handle non-English letters, characters? And yes, it can. Anything that can be represented in UTF-8 can be successfully put into the collection just fine. So the metadata often has a lot of, we've done one with Japanese characters on a regular basis, and French and Spanish characters are pretty common in our collections. In terms of updating the interface into a different language, there's a number of people who have done that. If you that involves some more in-depth editing of the template to replace all the places where we're using English with the labels that you want. We do actually have a doc in the docs that point out all the locations of the English labels that you'll want to delete and switch out. And so Olivia put that in there. And we've also tried to work on multiple language support. It's really complicated in any system. And so that's a kind of work in progress right now. There's a lot of different approaches there as well. Olivia's been working on one where there's kind of a CSV configuration that tries to put all of the configuration of those multiple languages into one place. It gets really complicated and messy, but it's possible. Other people have just simply have a mirrored site so that there's one, the English version, and one, the Russian version. And then you have a kind of way of switching between those two exact copies of the site. And so that's another approach that people have done. But yeah, multi-language support in a single site is messy and complicated for everyone. So yeah, talk to us about that if it's something that's of interest. I think, let's see.
Are there other questions? Some that popped on video.
Clarissa, did it make sense what I said about the compound objects for your question?
Well, yes, though I wouldn't know how to do it, but
Right.
it makes sense. Yeah.
So I can show you, there's a few examples out there that I can share from that. And it just kind of depends on how your metadata is structured. So sometimes we can, some people, like, there's a number of postcard collections out there where there's just a front and a back, and people have done that as there's a file name field is the front, and then there's another field in your metadata that's called back or whatever, and then we just do a little customization that shows anytime there's a back in the metadata, it just shows on the item page. There's more complicated ways to add more items where either you have it in your in a separate metadata sheet, the additional associated items, or you could have it in a single metadata file, which is what we often do from CollectionBuilder, because from Content DM, because Content DM, when it exports it, has all the associated items in the same spreadsheet. So it's all one spreadsheet, and then you associate the sort of page level items using an ID that points back at that main record. And so there's kind of one record for every item, and then there's a separate line that is like a child item that associates back to one of the main records. And so when you look at the browse page, you're only going to see those main records. When you look at the item page, you're going to see the main record and then all of the sub records that are related to it. And we have some documentation on how to do that. A lot of people have implemented it in slightly different ways. And we will eventually have that sort of built in as not in GH,
branch
but in
CSV.
in CSV, we will have that implemented.
And it works, but it's still not documented very well, and it's a little quirky, and it's been one of those things where it's hard to keep maintained. But I just linked out to where you can kind of see how the metadata works there, where you have the object ID and then a parent ID, and then we've got it so that will actually work with CSV. You just need to use that branch, but that's a pretty complex thing to do. So if you're interested, let us know. We can try to fix something up.
Thank you so much.
Some people have been talking about it, and so it's definitely there's definitely some approaches that work really well. And here's a person in this discussion that discovered that it wasn't so hard. It's hard, but it's doable.
Should I go over the homework for tonight, or can pull that up? So your homework will be cloning your collection repository, just like Devin did. You can use whatever works for you. If you want to do GitHub desktop or use a command line, whatever, we have documentation for both, and it's here in the homework make this bigger. And then you'll want to open your collection repository in Visual Studio Code. Go ahead and serve your collection locally using these commands. So we tried to make everything right here for you, so you don't have to go back and forth with the video, although I'll send out the recording again too if you need that. And then just practice editing your theme in the config CSVs. You don't need to get all of them done, but if you can jump in and get a little bit just so you know how they're working, that would be great. And then practice committing and pushing your changes. And we've documented 3 different ways to commit and push. So all of those documentation links are here, and hopefully they're useful to you. And then play around with those, the boot swatch themes and font family and size if you want to. Those are in the theme YAML file as well. So hopefully that all works for you guys. If you have questions for installing software, let us know.
Yeah, if you want to stay on, I know Clarissa, you were having an error still. You want to stay on, we definitely would talk through that. If anyone wants to stay on too, I was gonna give a quick like overview of what that was going on in that terminal, since we just kind of jumped through that really quick too.
Oh yeah, office hour times are from 2 to 3 today and tomorrow. And it's just the same Zoom link that you use for this class.
Would it be
Evan-
helpful if we were on like half an hour before class for anyone? It seems like sometimes people are popping in there, but if that's not helpful, we won't jump on. Yes, please. Okay.
Do you want me to stop recording, Evan, before you go into that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, if you want to stop recording, that'd be yes.